When you think about historic London, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For a lot of us, it's this really specific image, right? Foggy streets, gaslight, dark, spooky shadows. It's a place where every single cobblestone seems to whisper some story about murder or mystery. So let's get into that. I mean, look at this picture. This kind of creepy, narrow alley, it just feels like old London, doesn't it? But this whole vibe, it isn't just the thing of the past. It is a massive, thriving industry today. Dark tourism is huge, and London is right at the center of it all. And you can see it in the names of these walking tours that are all over the city right now. They use words like blood, butchery, horrors. They're literally selling tickets based on the goriest parts of the city's history. It's so clear that we're still completely fascinated by London's gruesome past. So that brings us to the big question, right? Why is London's criminal history so legendary? Is it because the city was just uniquely violent? Was it actually the most dangerous place in the world? Or is there something else going on that built this reputation? Well, to really get to the bottom of this myth of criminal London, you have to start with the most famous, most terrifying icon of them all, Jack the Ripper. He's the legend that really casts a shadow over everything else. Okay, so let's set the scene. It's 1888 in London's East End. The district of Whitechapel was just bursting at the seams. It was packed with people suffering from extreme poverty and simmering with social tension. It was a place where, by one estimate, over 1,000 women had to turn to prostitution just to make it to the next day. It was a total powder keg. And then the killings started. In just 10 weeks, 5 women were murdered. Marianne Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. This terrifying period became known as the Autumn of Terror, and it just sent this massive wave of panic through the entire city. The attacks themselves were just unbelievably brutal. They involved these horrific mutilations. And just to give you an idea, let's take one victim, Catherine Eddowes. Her throat was cut ear to ear. Her abdomen was ripped open, her left kidney and her uterus were taken, and her face was terribly disfigured. The police surgeon at the time figured it would have taken the killer at least 5 minutes to do all that. And of course, the killer got a name that would go down in history. But where did Jack the Ripper actually come from? It came from a letter, the Dear Boss letter, that was sent to a news agency. And get this, most experts now think the letter was a complete fake, probably written by a journalist just to sell more newspapers. Think about that. The media literally invented the name for the legend. Then there was another letter, the From Hell letter. This one was sent to the head of a local citizens' watch group. It showed up in a small box, and inside was half of a human kidney, preserved in alcohol. The writer claimed he'd fried and eaten the other half. It was this piece of macabre theater that just completely cemented the killer's terrifying reputation. So, the brutal, unsolved murders, the media going crazy, the legendary, almost mythical killer. Yeah, this is the story of criminal London that we've all been told for over 100 years. But what if that's not the whole picture? What if the reason we know this story in so much detail isn't because the crime itself was so unique, but because the telling of the story was unique? What if London's real specialty isn't crime, but something else entirely? To find that answer, we need to look past the sensational headlines and turn to what the historians have to say. And they argue that London's criminal legend is actually built on a very, very different foundation. This all comes down to a field called historiography, and it's basically the history of history itself. So it's not just about asking what happened, but asking how do we know what happened? What's the evidence we're using to tell these stories? And this slide just lays it out perfectly. Was London a city with more crime? Or was it a city with more records? Was it uniquely violent or just uniquely documented? Well, historians are pretty convinced it's the second one. Historian Robert Shoemaker points to a few key things that made London totally unique. First, the city had this dense network of courts, which made it way easier for regular people to bring cases. And they did. Private prosecutions were super common. People were constantly taking their neighbors to court. On top of that, you had an intensively policed city and a massive, competitive newspaper industry on Fleet Street that was starving for juicy stories. All those things together created this absolute tidal wave of criminal records and news reports that you just didn't see anywhere else in the world. Okay, So if we push the Ripper legend aside for a minute and actually look into this huge archive of records, what did everyday crime in London really look like? Well, the most common serious crime wasn't murder at all. It was theft. And even that wasn't always straightforward. Like, take the London docks. For ages, workers took home spilled goods. They called them perquisites and saw it as just part of their pay. But then employers tried to crack down on it, and suddenly these workers were being prosecuted for theft. The line between what was custom and what was a crime got really blurry. And the record shows some really surprising things. For instance, making counterfeit coins was a major crime, a felony. But between 1674 and 1749, almost half, 46% of all the people accused of it were women. Their tough economic situation, combined with skills in things like handling metal and passing money in shops, actually made them key players in this whole underground economy.
And some people got incredibly good at working the system. There was a prostitute and pickpocket named Charlotte Walker. She was arrested at least 30 times and put on trial 12 times. And yet, she somehow avoided any real punishment for 24 years. How'd she do it? Well, she only stole coins, which are really hard to identify. She made sure she never got caught with the goods on her. And then in court, she would give what they called a spirited defense, basically creating just enough doubt for the jury. Pretty clever, right?
And it wasn't just criminals who knew their way around a courtroom. Because the courts were so cheap and accessible, ordinary Londoners used them all the time. In the late 18th century, it's estimated that 1 in every 7 households was involved in an assault case each year, often just to settle arguments with their neighbors.
So let's bring this all back around. On one hand, you have the reality of widespread, mostly small-time crime that was just meticulously recorded. And on the other, you have this spectacular myth of a city full of monsters. How did we get from one to the other?
Well, look here. On the left, you've got a cartoon from 1888 making fun of the police because they couldn't catch the Ripper. It was a huge media sensation. Now look at the right. That's a poster for a modern tour that reframes the story to focus on the victims. You can draw a direct line between the two. The 19th century media story has been packaged, polished, and sold to us as a 21st century product. So at the end of the day, London's reputation for crime isn't really a reflection of it being an unusually dangerous place. It's a reflection of its unique ability, thanks to its courts, its police, and its powerful press, to record, publicize, and turn the stories of its own dark side into powerful legends. And that leaves us with one last thought to chew on. The Ripper was never caught, the case is still unsolved, but his legend is more famous and more profitable today than it has ever been. So what does our ongoing obsession with these gruesome, unresolved stories really say about us?